Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders, 2025 Regional Edward R. Murrow Award winner for Best Podcast. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee. Sponsored by New Mexico PBS.
There are so many kids in New Mexico that for one reason or another, they end up in the state's custody. And reporting on issues within the Children, Youth, and Families Department, also known as CYFD here in New Mexico, it's complex and challenging at times.
Yeah, and some of that reporting work that we've done on this topic over the last year, you may have heard that some kids in state custody are sleeping in CYFD offices because there aren't enough homes for them to stay in.
When you think about a child sleeping in an office, it's obviously not an ideal situation. We'll get into more details about how that works, but let's bring in our guest right away. We're bringing back the other half of our KRQE Investigates team with me. Ann Pierret joins us to talk about one of her recent investigations into this issue. Ann, thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
Yeah, thanks. And we will put a link to the investigation at the heart of today's episode here in the show notes. You can also watch it on our KRQE YouTube page or krqe.com/investigations. But let's just start from the beginning, Ann. What led you to report on this story in the first place? We know you've done several chapters, different stories about work at CYFD, but specifically, what led you to this one?
Yeah, kids sleeping in offices it's upsetting. Just the sentence, a child who was taken out of their home, they're in foster care, they're taken away from their family, that's enough trauma, right? And then now the place you're putting them in is a literal office. And it's been happening for years, we've found out. And so it was just trying to gain a better understanding of this situation and the reasoning behind it. Back in December of 2023, I did a story, and I believe we talked about it here on the podcast as well, about kids sleeping in the Roswell office. And it was, we got lapel video from one of the situations where police responded. That's what we found out, is the staff there was not trained for de-escalation, for handling these kids who have a lot of outbursts because they've got a lot on their plate, right? They're kids. And so police were repeatedly called, and that just kind of helped give the community, right, this insight into what's actually happening inside these offices, what this situation looks like. So then prior to that story airing, in the research phase of that story, I had filed a public records request to CYFD, to the state agency, asking for any and all emails between CYFD staff members talking about kids in state offices, sleeping in state office buildings. And I finally received that IPRA last summer, so 7 months after the story aired. And it was 1,136 pages. There were attachments on all of those emails. And I went through every single one of those, and that kind of sparked this idea of, they're reaching out to other states to find out how they're handling this situation of kids being in offices. Also learned kids are in hotels, motels, shelters, things like that. So that kind of is what sparked this idea of just looking closer at it and talking to the state about, it appears you're trying to find a solution here. Have you found it?
Yeah. Well, and I will say that's a really interesting way of going about this story, because as you're right, we hear that phrase, kids sleeping in office buildings, but even just getting a lot of information or perspective about what that's really like seems like it was pretty difficult to finally get that picture, which this IPRA led you down the path of. So an interesting way to go about then putting the story together.
Yeah. And I will say, too, something that was interesting, getting that picture, right, you mentioned, and that's been really hard for us, trying to understand what does this look like? Because you think of a kid sleeping in an office, you're thinking of on a couch, on a floor, on maybe an air mattress. And CYFD, the secretary, has repeatedly told us they are not on the floor. They are in beds. They are in beds. They are in beds. Nobody can believe that. And so then I filed another public records request saying, give me, because through those emails, I learned they have a binder of what the situation looks like, what the environment looks like, what the setup looks like in each one of these offices. And I said, okay, so then give me that and let me see what this looks like. The public deserves to know because they have really negative ideas of what this could look like. And shockingly, I mean, I had you look at those photos and we were like, oh, wow, they should have put these photos out a long time ago. There's a door on a room. They have their own individual room. There's a TV. There's an actual bed. There are toys, everything like that. So it was really striking to see.
Yeah, and I was going to say, you know, you've reported on CYFD office stays in the past. Again, that is, when we say CYFD, this is the Children, Youth, and Families Department. Presumably, there's nowhere else for these children to stay. You mentioned sometimes they're in hotels or shelters. I got an indication from, like, just you saying they're looking elsewhere. They're looking outside of New Mexico. Is this not just a situation then in New Mexico? Other states have this issue as well?
Yeah, from reading the emails, they had reached out to the equivalent of the Children, Youth, and Families Department in other states. And it was Oklahoma who they ended up really partnering with because they found out about what they were doing, how they were getting kids out of offices. And that's how this Foster Care Plus program was born. They had them kind of come here, talk to them more about that. And I can go into that now if you'd like.
Well, let's get to that. But I do want to ask you one other question, just for people wondering, why are kids in offices? Why aren't there enough places for them? Can you just, like, I guess, paint us a picture of why that is? Why are kids having to sleep in offices?
Yeah, I think that was really the hardest revelation in talking with the secretary. It was really upsetting because it's not just that there aren't enough foster families. It's that these are the kids who they need a higher level of care. They have behavioral or mental health issues or both on top of the trauma that led them into the foster care system in the first place. So they're quote unquote difficult, right? They're going to act out. They're going to have some struggles. And that's hard for a foster family to handle, especially if they've got another kid or something like that in their home, right? And so typically in the past, what the plan was for the secretary was she said they would reach out to TFCs, therapeutic foster cares. Now, these TFCs have they hire their own foster families. They reach out and recruit their own foster families. And this is just really intensive therapeutic care, medical therapeutic care. The secretary told me throughout 2024, they sent 60 packets of these kids. Here's their situation to the therapeutic foster care. They then look at that and say, okay, let's see if we can find a match with one of these families. They sent 50 back. So that's 50 kids that have nowhere else to go because a TFC won't take them and a regular foster family won't take them. So the office is where they end up. As a result, then that's what she started trying to figure out. What can we do for these kids? I mean, it's just it's an upsetting situation when you really think about it.
Yeah, a lot of factors to that situation. So you met a foster family for this story, the Warrens, who had moved to New Mexico and basically went through the process of taking in foster kids. Can you tell us a little bit more about them? Why is this something they felt called to do, as they said?
Yeah, the Warrens were a really special family, and it was really cool to be allowed into their home, and we spent several hours with them. They live in Los Alamos, and they moved here several years ago. They'd always had this plan to adopt kids. They were initially told that they couldn't have kids. And then by a miracle, as they say, they ended up having 2 kiddos who are a little bit older now. And they just decided, we can do this still, so let's try. So they connected with CYFD here in New Mexico, went through the whole process, and it really, as they told me, isn't that difficult. Here, CYFD told me right now they aim for 3 months once you apply to getting everything done to connect you and help you become a foster parent. For them, it took a little bit longer because it was like during COVID, but yeah, they have had 25 kids come through their house, which is amazing to hear, honestly. And it's not, I think something that's important to know is sometimes these are just like weekend stays. And that's one big way that you as a community member can really help out, right? Because this family just needs a break. Maybe they've got, something that they need to do that weekend. So they ask for just, can you take them for a quick weekend? And they've done that repeatedly. It was really cool to hear.
Did they talk about the challenge of having to, welcome these children to their home and then have to say goodbye so many times? Is that something you guys discussed?
Yes. Yeah. And they got emotional talking about that, of course. I mean, and it's difficult for the older kids too, right? Because they become their older siblings, right? Or their younger siblings. And, yeah, you think about somebody living with you for an extended period of time and then they go, right? But they said it's really helped them teach their kids empathy. It's helped them teach their kids just that everybody is born into a different situation. Everybody has different struggles that they're facing, and that you can be the difference, right? You can step in and you can help out. And, through that too, I mean, imagine all the different personalities and behaviors that these kids have really been able to encounter too. They've learned a lot. So, and they did adopt one of the kids, which is really, really cool as well. They had him since he was in the NICU. They've been fostering him, and so they were able to adopt him.
Wow.
Yeah.
How many children were there when you visited?
The child who they adopted was there, and then they had an infant in there as well. She was so cute, so tiny, and they had her for a little while at that point. So
we'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
Hi, I'm Logan Rader, host of New Mexico Living. New Mexico News Insiders is sponsored by New Mexico PBS.
If you like New Mexico News Insiders, learn more about New Mexico in Focus, a weekly hour-long show analyzing decisions impacting New Mexico statewide. Stream it anytime, anywhere. Visit nmpbs.org and follow them on all social media platforms.
Now back to New Mexico News Insiders.
Well, the need for foster families is obviously critical, as you outlined. The Warrens were called immediately after they passed their clearance, right? Tell us about the new effort by CYFD, that, quote, foster care plus model. How is this different than standard foster families, standard foster homes as we understand them?
Right. It's the solution to getting kids out of offices is how the secretary kind of explained it. This is their plan, finally. They think that this is going to work. I mentioned TFCs rejecting kids, right? Well, the reason is the kids, those 50 kids, they didn't rise to the level of what a TFC provides. Their behavioral or mental health struggles didn't rise to that. So this is providing that support for these kids, but in a different way. So Foster Care Plus, they're calling it enhanced foster care. They're not recruiting new families. Of course, they still need new families for the kids who do not have higher level needs, but it's going to be veteran foster parents. So they know how this works, right? And they're giving them extra training on de-escalation, on just kind of trauma-informed training, and more wraparound services. And they're only going to put one kid in the home of those foster parents to really make sure that their needs are met. And the secretary described it as, maybe they just need a little bit more attention at school. Okay, so then we come up with a plan. Let's make sure that we are getting this, that, and the other meeting happening at school. What are the specific needs that these kids need? Let's make it happen. They'll have more check-ins from CYFD staff as well to make sure that everything's okay, and be able, to call at, say, 9 p.m., the secretary was saying, if the kid is really acting out and they just need that extra support, that extra help. So this is the plan, hopefully to get kids out of offices. They need that individual one-on-one attention and care.
It sounds like those kids are kind of in a gray area then, not rising to the level of the, like you said, the therapeutic specialty type home, but also a little bit too maybe stressful of a situation for your standard foster family.
Right, which I think that's what's so hard, right? Because then they end up in an office. So, it's just like a no-win situation, which is really tough. So I'm hopeful that this will be the solution. You know, it's been a long time coming, but I told you earlier that they had connected with other states, and they got this idea from Oklahoma. They're modeling it after a program in Oklahoma. So they had the staff members from Oklahoma come here and kind of embed in their staff and help them understand different policies, right? What do we need to do? What did you guys not get right so that we can get it right here? What can we do here to really make this successful? And I did find it really interesting that it's going to be veteran foster parents, right, for one, and that it's only going to be one kid, because the hope, too, right, is that parent really will be able to be successful with that child so that something doesn't happen where the child needs to be removed again. So,
we obviously talked about the pressures that the families have to deal with, that the kids themselves are dealing with, but I know staff is the other component here that faces all the pressure,
right?
In trying to figure out how to best address this situation. CYFD Secretary Teresa Casados told you, Ann, the turnaround and burnout of CYFD staff is a real challenge. For example, when a kid has to sleep in an office, that requires also somebody working a 24-hour shift, basically, from a CYFD worker. And if nobody volunteers for a shift like that, as I understand, the state can essentially force those employees to pick one, and somebody has to do it. Is that right? And it really does not feel like that's a sustainable model.
Right. And that was something that I learned from the emails, because we saw going through it, repeated requests. Hey, we've got a child in this office who can work. Hey, we've got a child in this office, so-and-so needs to work. And I mean, this is a request from, to all of the staff from maybe Roswell. So now you're also requesting somebody maybe in Taos to come help you out. It was just really interesting.
It's wild.
It is. And a 24-hour shift. I mean, hopefully you can sleep when the kid sleeps, right? I mean, but I don't know. But somebody has to be there. Somebody has to be watching them. They are still in the state's care. So, and she fully admitted it's not sustainable, and something's got to give. And it was a very, I've interviewed the secretary a few times now, and this was the most transparent she had really been. She really said, we've got a problem, and we're trying to fix it. And so hopefully this is it.
Yeah. To get just a better idea of the need for foster families in New Mexico, you did report some numbers. Data shows that the number of office stays doubled each year starting in 2022, with 510 office stays reported in 2024. I'm wondering, did you get a sense at all of why that is? Why is the number of children, without a place to stay or in-state custody increasing? Is this a supply and demand issue?
Yeah, I didn't get a direct answer on that, but going through, I requested a lot of data from CYFD because, of course, they've got to keep up on all of this too, right? They've got to keep account of it. It's clear that since 2020, the number of, they call them resource families, foster families, has gone down. It's not significant in that it's like hundreds, but it was it was higher in 2020, and it has not gotten back up to that number yet in 2025. I should say too, while the number of foster families, I should say too that what they track as well is with these resource families, how many beds does each family have? And so while that number you'll see in the data is higher than the number of kids in state custody, it doesn't mean that all these beds are going to be filled. Say I have 4 beds in my house, I could take 4 kids, but like realistically, I can't take 4 kids, right? So I'm taking 2 or something like that. Mm-hmm. So, but one thing that I thought was really interesting too, and that CYFD was very proud of, is the number of next of kin relative foster care placements has increased over the years. And I believe most recently it was at 50% of kids in state custody are with a relative, which is huge, right? You have families like that stepping up. So it's not a foster family. So I know that that's helping too. Yeah. But
like if a kid is taken from their parents, maybe there's an aunt who can step in.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Obviously, CYFD is making changes to try to not only recruit more families, it sounds like, but, find these other maybe more creative ways of finding, places for these kids to stay. But I'm wondering just in general, you mentioned the foster family count went down a little bit after 2020. Did we see an increase at all in kids in state custody in New Mexico?
Yeah, we saw a decrease at one point, and then it's gone back up. In 2020, just to give you some numbers, it was 2,040 kids in state care. Then in 2021, that number went down to 1,853. Continued to go down in 2022, but then started going back up in 2023. And so we're at, and this is numbers as of April 30th, 2025. So 2,141 kids are in state care right now.
Gotcha.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. And one thing on that as well, in talking to the secretary, obviously it's an alarming number, right? But that's not, because of something she did, right? That's as a result of kids needing help, right? Something happened with their family. And something she pointed out that she wanted people to remember is, yes, it's frustrating to have a kid in an office. It's upsetting to have a kid sleeping in an office, but they're safe. And that was kind of a reality check for me, right? They were taken out of a situation, most likely, that they shouldn't have been in. That could have been a dangerous situation, an abusive situation. We don't know, right? But they're safe. And her staff, the CYFD staff, I've met several of them. I'm sure you guys have too. These are our everyday neighbors, right? Love them so much. And so while they, as I've heard from them, are frustrated with those 24-hour shifts, they're happy to do it, right? These are kids at the end of the day.
We'll be right back with more on New Mexico News Insiders.
Hi, I'm Monica Wicki, host of New Mexico Living. This episode of New Mexico News Insiders is sponsored by New Mexico PBS. If you enjoy New Mexico News Insiders, check out New Mexico in Focus, a great source for insights about what's happening in our state. Catch their podcasts and videos at nmpbs.org or stream it anytime, anywhere on the free PBS app. Now, let's continue to New Mexico News Insiders.
How do you see some of the efforts the agency is now trying to make, maybe ultimately helping alleviate the needs in our state? I mean, I know perhaps it's maybe a difficult personal perspective to put on that, but maybe in your reporting as well, do the folks that you spoke with, the leaders, feel that these will make, a difference in helping alleviate some of these needs?
That's the plan, right? That's the hope. And with this training for Foster Care Plus, it's like an intensive extra training for these parents. And they had 5 parents sign up earlier this year. They went through the training in January. And so far, 2 kids have been placed in those, out of those 5 homes. So that's slowly but surely making a difference. And the secretary said there may likely always be a need, but at least they're trying to do something about it, is kind of how she phrased it. Like we are trying, we are paying attention, and we're hoping that we can at least kind of minimize that need. So they're hopeful, and they're really optimistic about this. So
it also sounds like there's also a mandate. You mentioned in your story about the Kevin S. settlement agreement. One of the requirements of that agreement is to end office stays. Is this something that CYFD indicated to you that they will be able to accomplish?
Yeah. The mandate in there is let's get appropriate placement for kids, right? And the appropriate placement being a house. So, which is, I know what supporters of this Kevin S. settlement, regular community members, you and me are like, yeah, let's get this moving. And that was signed in 2020. So it's been 5 years. And
they're still working on it.
Right.
And the fact we know about settlement agreements in New Mexico, they last for a long time.
Yes. But the fact that just now, 5 years later, you just now came up with this plan, right? I know that was frustrating to some former foster families that I spoke with about this. But the one thing I asked the secretary, she came in 2023, 3.5 years after the settlement was signed, right, with a lot on her plate. And I just said, do you feel like you're drowning? And her response was, no, I feel like I'm finally swimming. It took me a while to try to grasp what was going on. But now that I have a little bit of a better understanding of that, we're starting to make progress. We're chipping away at what we need to be doing. And she said, I get it. People are upset, and they have every right to be. Again, it was a very transparent interview, as I mentioned. So she understands how people are feeling. And obviously, as we always say, the wheels of justice move slowly, right? So this is a perfect example of that.
Yeah. One thing that strikes me is, if she feels like she is just swimming, she is also approaching the latter part of Governor Lujan Grisham's second term here. So, as we know, anytime there's a new governor, they always bring in their own people, and you just kind of wonder about the continuity. And I think that there's probably a whole different story to be said about that. But many of the problems of CYFD seemingly over the years have been just the
constant turnover of leadership.
Constant turnover, not only of the employees, as we've talked about here, but yes, of leadership too. So
I asked about that.
Yeah.
If you think that this is the answer, this Foster Care Plus program, how are you going to ensure that the next team, the next secretary continues this? And she said that is top of mind. They are trying to make sure that it is sustainable and that it does work right to the point that they won't want to get rid of it. So she's got a little bit of time, so we'll see.
Interesting. Well, is there anything else that we're missing, or something that you wanted to add, maybe something that stuck out with you in doing this reporting and the process here?
One piece that I thought was really interesting about this Foster Care Plus program is they are really focusing, narrowing in on the Bernalillo County community and the Chavez County community. The Roswell area. And that's because that's where the most kids are sleeping in office buildings right now. And I said, well, okay, so say you've got a kid in Taos or in Los Alamos sleeping in an office. What's the plan there? And the plan is to get that kid to the Roswell area, to the Albuquerque area, to a family here if somebody's willing to take them. The hope being creating this community of Foster Care Plus families that can kind of rely on each other and help each other out. So I know that could be a little controversial, right? Taking a kid out of the community that they know. But she was saying, hopefully the idea behind it is like the good outweighs the bad, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Ann, Brett, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Again, again, thanks to Ann Pierret of the KRQE Investigates team for having this conversation about her story with us. And again, if you haven't seen that piece, you can check it out on our website, and we'll put a link there in the show notes. Really worth watching for sure.
Yeah, and we'll be sure and keep you guys posted. I'm sure there will be more reporting on CYFD in the future. If you all have story ideas or topics for our show, always feel free to reach out. I'm Gabrielle.Burkhart@krqe.com via email and gburknm on social media.
I'm at Chris McKee TV and also Chris.McKee@krqe.com. Thanks for watching and listening.